This is a presentation I gave in 2007 at the PMI conference in Atlanta, and I called it Project Genome Mapping, and it's about decoding the DNA of successful project management. And here's the thought process. All projects are made up of the same elements, and some projects are more successful than others. And so the proposal here is that it's managing the structure and the interrelationships of these elements that enables a project to be successful. So today I'm going to talk about what those elements are, understand how the elements make up the project deliverables and their relationships. We'll talk about genetic defects in projects, and then we'll talk about how these relate and how to gauge success from each of them and some best practices. Some of this is going to sound basic, but I think it's the construct and that is really what's different and maybe the different way of thinking about it. So all projects have the same elements. And again, I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, but I think it'll be how they get arranged that might provide some insight to you. The first is activities. Projects are made up of activities, right? We work on things, our team members do things that drive deliverables and milestones. Those things take a period of time, that's duration, to be performed. The activities are performed by resources, which could be people. Resources could also be technologies or tools required to do the work. And then there's a cost to those resources, or there's rates for the people. Again, pretty basic, but let's talk about how the atomic elements then come together. And so the plan is essentially, right, the activities times their duration and the people working on them. So when you have your project plan, right, you have your bottom-up view of all the things that people are doing. It's what the team tells you they're working on. They tell you how long they work on them, and then the interdependencies between them. The schedule is two of the four elements, right? It's the activities times the duration. So that's used to communicate to stakeholders, things like Gantt charts and roadmaps. There's the critical path of the key activities to get to the end. And I call it sort of a community plan because it's important that it's shared with others. The resource model is the resources that are being worked on and the duration. So a lot of times this is more of the view based on the number of resources. So it's more top down, right? Bottom up is here's all the activities and how long they take. Top down is I'm on a project that has 10 people and those 10 people are full time. So I know they're 40 hours a week. And the durations ideally should map to phases or deliverables, sprints, things like that. The budget is then comprised of all of the costs. And so you've got people times duration times rates, right? I have the 10 people, they're $100 an hour and they're here for 4 months. That tells me my labor cost. I have software that's a certain rate, infrastructure, things like that. You add all those up and you get the budget. And then for waterfall type projects where there's a change control, the change control is against all of these things. Any one of these things can change. The milestones, how long they take, who's working on the project, maybe the cost of something could go up. So change control is against all of them. And so when you think about then the integration of it, and again, it's a relatively simple construct, but what you can see is that all of these are interrelated, right? So the plan is three of the elements. Then you overlay the schedule, which is activities and durations. You've got the resource model, you've got the budget, and then the changes go against all of that. So you can see here why I use the DNA metaphor, because each element is used up in sort of the DNA of projects, and it's the combination of these elements that make up the various project level deliverables. And so they really should be managed as an integrated and interrelated sort of ecosystem. And I think that's what's different here is I don't see a lot of PMs who manage these things as interrelated. They're generally all sort of one-offs, which gets to sort of what are some of the genetic defects. And so, as mentioned, I've seen a lot of times people will manage the schedule separate from the budget. So the schedule's over on the left, the budget's over on the right. And sometimes that means the budget's just a sort of a high-level estimate. But then you can't assess the impact of schedule changes. So if my schedule is delayed by a month, what does that mean to the budget? And if you're not tying, well, that means I'm extending the resources times their rate, then really you're just kind of living paycheck by paycheck, right? You're not sure of what's made up of the financials. And so when the actuals come in, you can't tie it to the work, nor can you determine the implications of changes. Same thing with having the resources separated from the budget. So if the budget's just one big dollar amount versus the people that make up the resources, there's no clarity into what makes it up. And it's really hard to compute estimate at complete, which is what it's going to take to sort of finish the project. Another one is only performing change controls on the plan. So changes needs to be managed across more than just scope. If the duration of a project extends, if the costs go up, all of those things need to be coordinated. And I'm not a big fan of big, robust change control processes. So it's at the very least talking about the implications of those changes. Is if I extend by a month, what are the implications? So that there's transparency and the leaders can make a deliberate decision. So let's talk about how the different elements relate. So we talked about plan and schedule here, and they're tightly related since they're both made up of the activities and timeframes. And so the plan is kind of the full set of activities, the schedules, and that gets communicated, and then the schedule is the more sort of detailed view, and both need to get sort of maintained together. The second one is the resource model should absolutely map to the schedule to determine duration of resources. And a lot of times when I create resource plans, I actually overlay the schedule up top. So if it's an Excel spreadsheet, I'll put the phases up top so you can actually see, hey, the BAs are on the requirements phase, or my Scrum team is aligned to a particular PI. And that's where level loading comes in, and you can sort of assign the resources to the schedule. So they very much should be based. It also tells you when to roll off resources so that you're not just hanging on to resources, which also means you're holding on to cost. Which gets to my next point, which is the budget is made up of the resource model and the rates. So it's important to recognize these, and the resource model, actually, in my view, the resource model and the budget are kind of one and the same. So I actually maintain both in the same deliverable. And then you've got the plan and the budget as well, since they're both tied to the resources. And so anything that sort of slips on the schedule extends the project, means I'm carrying resources for longer. Those resources cost money, and therefore has an implication on the budget. And then finally, as we talked about, change control has to be on all of the different atomic elements. So let's talk about, one potential model that can be used to manage all of these things. I talked about a sort of an Excel spreadsheet that I have, and it looks kind of like this, where there's a detailed resource view. So I talked about, I have sort of a schedule across the top. You can see in this case, it's a waterfall project. I've got requirements and design. Then two is you sort of map the resources to the allocations. So you can see here, these are all full-time resources, and we start to wind down in June. The monthly rates are in there so I can get the total. And then when I calculate all those things at the bottom, I get the budget by month, which allows me to manage the budget month over month and get a sense of how I'm tracking. And that's where it gets to sort of estimate at complete, which is, sorry, went too fast. If I baseline the budget view, then let's say we're in the month of April. I know that January and February and March are my actuals to date. And then I know that April, May, and June are my estimate to complete. And that's what allows me to manage the forecast. So I sort of overlay the forecasted dollars with the actuals as they come in. So look, this is pretty basic stuff, but I think it's the metaphor that I want you to take away from this is that all projects share the same DNA: activities, durations, resources, and rates. Every project, that's the genetic code of them. Deliverables are sort of the chromosomes built up from the atomic elements. And there are genetic defects when these things are not aligned or managed as interdependent. So healthy projects require the integrated DNA sequencing, and change is really about the immune system, right? Guarding against mutations. And so the whole point of this presentation is you need to manage this holistically and treat these deliverables as interdependent genes and not just isolated parts. Let me know what you think of the metaphor. It's kind of basic, but I think it's a really good visual of how to think about projects. And thanks for watching.